Hi, I'm Claire and I'm from a specialist market research agency in youth, kids and family. We're based in London and we're also a proud sister company to Generation Media, also part of that group. I'm the Associate Director at iGen. Been there a little over kind of 14 months or so. In terms of this particular project that I'm going to be talking about today, this was some research that we did in collaboration with Sky Media. Sky were particularly interested in the kind of preschool market because at the time there was a real kind of industry gap in terms of the knowledge for preschool behaviour. Because of course some of the real kind of big instruments that we use to measure TV and audience, such as your barbs and your TGIs, just don't go that low in terms of data. So it was a real sense of wanting to build a better picture of that market, but also how Sky themselves and of course their clients that they work with can better engage with that market. So in terms of the kind of things that we wanted to explore when it comes to the preschool market, we were looking at the kind of consumer behaviour. So that's the who, the what, the where, the whens, the hows, all those kind of core questions, but also to get underneath that. So what are those drivers and motivations that trigger those behaviours with their media usage? We also wanted to understand that impact of advertising cut-through in terms of engagement with preschoolers and their main carers, but also looking at what makes effective messaging. What is it that grabs their attention the most, and how does that influence their caregiver? Now, when I talk about main carer or caregiver, in actual fact the natural fallout was 4% males, 96% women, so I'll predominantly use the word mum within that context. And from this study we spoke to just over 1,000 mums within the UK, and we took what we call a mixed method approach. So in research you'll often hear words, quantitative and qualitative. So from a qualitative perspective, we were looking to kind of get the whys, and also as a kind of a scoping exercise to understand the behaviour. We started off with something called digital ethnography, and it's basically observational behaviour. That's kind of what we mean by ethnography. And this is an app which mum can download onto her phone, and looking at their viewing behaviour over a 2-day period, so a weekday and a weekend, we looked at how her preschooler engages with kind of TV media. So mum will answer a set number of questions. She'll also be posting videos and photos about how her child interacts with it, and that's fantastic because you can see it in the home, whether they're out and about on the go. So it just gives you that kind of real kind of insight into that actual behaviour. We then spoke with these mums, so there were 12 mums altogether, and we then had interviews with them. So we've seen their behaviour, we've looked at their diaries. Okay, so what are the triggers behind that? We also had focus groups with mums. The focus groups were for 2 reasons. One was looking and trying to understand that mutual viewing. So what is it that engages with their preschooler? How does that interplay with their mum? And then also looking at it from a messaging viewpoint. So what is it that grabs their preschooler's attention? And what's the difference between the devices as well? Is there a certain device which has, more of an impact than others? And then finally, it was quantifying that result, so looking at the facts and figures from a nationwide perspective. Now, when we think about preschoolers, this age group that we're talking about, we're 12 months to just under 4 years. So that's just a 3-year age gap, which doesn't sound like a lot. But in terms of developmental stages of a child, it's huge. I mean, you're going from a child of about 1 who's just about standing up by themselves, maybe walking a little bit, has 1 or 2 syllables, and a kind of up to about 300 words or so, and then to the upper end of those children who are just ready to go to school. They're dressing themselves, they've got a rich vocabulary, they're understanding understanding more about, the social structures around them. So there's a massive difference in that. And of course, not only is there physical aspects there, so of course the younger end, they're not actually able to hold a tablet themselves. So that's going to play a big role in terms of what media they use. For the older children, in terms of their vocabulary and cognitive development, they're much more likely to be triggering behaviours themselves. What is true for all of these children is mum is the gatekeeper. She is the gatekeeper for entertainment. And often the entertainment that she uses on other screens is going to be originating from what she sees on TV. So that's the kind of what she uses her point of reference. So with all that in mind and in the context of that, the kind of the overall narrative from this study is that yes, mum and preschoolers are using multiple devices, but TV remains the most dominant medium that she's accessing for content. And it's also the one that's most effective in engaging preschool mums mutually viewing with her children. And we'll come on to talk about that quite a bit in terms of this mutual viewing. So when it comes to entertainment, screen-based entertainment, regardless of device, these are the top two drivers that trigger usage. First of all, it's about keeping the child busy while mum needs to get on with jobs in the house. So there's a very practical reason. It's about convenience. That's kind of probably the most tangible driver. From an emotional viewpoint, it's all about we can do this together. It's about that active engagement. It's about spending time with her child and doing something that they both enjoy together. So there is that very much the kind of emotional aspect as well for mum. Each screen, of course, has its own benefits, and the order of these screens is actually based on screen size rather than kind of preference for them. So if we think about TV, first of all, what are kind of the core benefits for mum? Well, it's convenient for a start. It's central to their routine in terms of time of day and what's going on. And of course, routine is so important in those development stages for a child. It's centered around family. It's a shared device. It's that time that they can come together. It's that real anchor in the home. But it's also a mood improver, actually, for children. Mums were saying, if the child's feeling a little bit upset or is in a bit of a, off balance, then actually TV is really great for that kind of chill out time. But also TV, particularly going towards the evening, just before bedtime, that's real quality time for mum to be spending with child. So that's why it's also important for her. The other thing about the TV is the sense of trustworthiness, and we will come on to that in a bit. But from mum's perspective, it's something that if she's just slightly out of earshot or she might just be going into the kitchen, it's the device which she actually has most trust that her child will be safe in terms of viewing that content, as opposed to potentially being on a device where they might accidentally be clicking onto things which, mum wouldn't be happy them looking at. In terms of the laptop, its kind of main benefit is just that it's the second biggest screen. Generally, the laptop's quite onerous, it's quite tedious having to get it out and plug it in. From just a physical viewpoint, it's not really something you can necessarily sit on the sofa and watch because you have to have a stand for it to be on. But it is established. It's something that has been in the home for quite a lot and mum knows how to use. It's also, again, another aspect of trustworthiness is that mum thinks there's less chance of the child being able to do things. So the keyboard, it kind of stops them navigating away from the content. But mainly it's because if there's no alternative, it's the laptop. So the tablet, of course, its portability is its real kind of strong point. It's easy to access, but it also, particularly as a child gets older, so in that kind of 2.5 up to the 3.5 stage, it gives them much more of a feeling of independence because they're kind of sat there holding it themselves and it's kind of their device, their content. So mum really likes having the child to feel like, that sense of importance. The thing about the tablet, of course, though, for the younger kids is because if they can't navigate the content themselves, it does require mum to be around and on hand, especially if there's pop-ups or things like that she needs to help with. So it can be slightly less convenient from a TV point of view, which of course can just be rolling content that mum doesn't have to worry about. In terms of the mobile phone, the biggest kind of benefit is really being out and about. That's kind of the core time that mum will use mobile phone. For the youngest children, it's also the screen that they can hold, so that has an advantageous side to it there. But fundamentally, it's mum's phone, and she wants to be on the phone, or being able to text, being able to call, being on Facebook. It's her kind of way of being in contact with the outside world. So actually, she's not that keen on necessarily her child having access to her mobile phone. But certainly when she's out and about, that when you're in a restaurant, when you're in the car, it's ideal. So when it comes to access for different devices, TV is by far the predominantly used screen, followed by the tablet, the mobile phone, and then the laptop last, which is for all those reasons that we've mentioned above. The other thing about the TV, when we compare it to the tablet on a daily basis, it's used 3 times more frequently than the tablet. So it's also the one being used most often on a day-to-day basis. And in terms of trust, what we mentioned before, it's 70% trustworthy, and the closest to that was a tablet, which was around 50%. So in mum's eyes, it's significantly more trustworthy than these other devices when it comes to content watching. We also wanted to understand from an attention perspective which of these devices are most likely to grab a child's attention when it comes to such things as products. And in mum's eyes, again, it's very much the TV. And again, all those reasons we've said before, it's the biggest screen, it's the one that they're watching most often, it's the screen that mum trusts the most. And for that reason, again, it's also the one that's more likely to trigger the child's interest. And the types of things that do trigger this interest from the child, it's stuff that they can identify with. They like seeing children like themselves in content. They like the familiarity, whether that's a character that they relate to. In terms of, remember this kind of preschool age, where, especially the younger end, we're talking about kids who very much mimic behaviour. So strap lines that are easy to mimic and respond to, music that's simple to hum and repeat back. These are all the types of things that kids will kind of catch on to. When it comes to TV viewing, one of the really interesting things is this idea of mutual viewing. So looking at a child, on average across the different hours of the day, it's around 4% of the time that they're actually going to be on their own. Aside of that, it's either going to be with mum, or mum's going to be in earshot, or it's going to be with a sibling. So looking at the blue bar, we can see that that's actually the time when mum is actually viewing with her child. So that's when she's actively engaged. It's not that she's kind of off and doing other things. So from that perspective, we can see that she spend quite a lot of time in that shared space with her child. And particularly, as I said before, coming into that early evening stage, that wind down just before bedtime, that's a really important time when mum is spending time with her preschooler. And I'd just like to play you a short clip.
I've noticed the Cow and Gate advert, I believe it is, and it's the one with the children. So there's all different variations of all the children laughing, and it's saying, do I look like I need more nutrients and things like that. And instantly, even if my baby's doing something completely different, he might be off playing with his toys, as soon as he hears that first laugh of the baby, he's straight over at the telly, completely absorbed.
Take note of adverts more with children's TV because you've got more time to sit down and actually watch it. Whereas adult TV, you're more likely to just skip through the adverts because you want to watch what you want to watch.
I would say the impact of adverts change when I'm watching it with my child, when I'm not watching it with my child, especially around this time of year as Christmas is approaching. I like to see how my child would interact with that particular gift, if they show an interest, and therefore I'm more likely to purchase it.
I find myself far more interested in the adverts for children when I'm watching them with Tate, because if he stops and listens to the song or is very concentrated on it, I get it into my head, even though he's so young, that he obviously wants it, so I want to then go out and buy it for him.
So yeah, that paints quite a clear picture about the way mum is influenced by the way that their child is engaged with the content. And even if their child can't necessarily articulate that, it's the way their child is emotionally responding to something, which mum then sees that enjoyment, sees that pleasure, and thinks, wow, okay, this is really something that they're enjoying and I want to engage with that. And as they're talking about there, then go and buy related products for that. So in terms of kind of thinking about that kind of advertising, mums say that they're much more likely to purchase as a result of something they've seen on TV comparative to these other devices. And as we were saying before, it's the bigger screen, it's the one that the child's viewing much more frequently, and so for all those reasons, it is the one that is most likely to influence that purchase behaviour as well. Thinking about kind of the picture for Sky, so what does it mean in the real world in terms of this research? Well, for Sky, first of all, it was about understanding the marketplace and being able to share that more widely within their own organisation, but then also to their clients that they work with. It's being able to build a proposition for clients in terms of how they target mums in the preschool market, particularly that question of, well, what's the point, for example, in advertising during preschool time? But actually, we've already seen a massive amount of that is spent viewing with mum and grabbing her attention. And then also in terms of their own development, in terms of their offering to their customers and how they get attention to children. Thank you. I don't know if you'd like to ask any questions now. Is that, yeah?
Hi, I'm Lucy Gill. I'm from Diggles Consulting. So I also do research more on the qual, and I've looked into this side of things a little bit myself. One of the things I found really interesting, what you were saying, was that TV is still king, which is very much in line with what I've seen. One of the very interesting things I found, so I wonder whether it's something you've seen, is that children are, at the moment, they're spending most of the time on the TV, but a growing amount of time on the tablet, more on apps at the preschool age than they are on TV content. But something really fascinating seems to happen when you give them access to TV, like the Sky Kids app, for example, on that tablet, that their desire seems to grow to use it. There seems to be a push from the kid to be viewing it on the smaller screen. I think because from the way we've seen it and the research I've done, it seems to be that they have control over it. I wondered whether so I think statistically, TV is still absolutely got the majority. What I'm interested to know is whether you saw a shift for the homes where they are using TV on the tablet, and whether or not that you're seeing the same thing in terms of the kids' desire to use it on that platform.
Yeah, I think from the kids' point of view, particularly where there's siblings in the house and older brothers and sisters, the tablet becomes a very aspirational device to have and to hold, and they see their kind of older brothers and sisters playing with it. Of course, the age group for this kind of preschool market, the bottom end physically aren't going to be able to hold the tablet. So we are talking about those slightly older children. And it is, as I was saying before, about that idea of having some greater independence. So when they do have this screen, it's very much there, it's right in front of their face, and they can sit engaged and be absolutely quiet for 20 minutes while their program's on. The only issue with that content is whether they can navigate and direct themselves to other things within it, otherwise mum's going to have to be on hand. And of course the other issue with screens generally that we find from mums is that she tends to limit screen usage with devices much more so than she does with TV. So that's another reason why. Yeah.
And the mums don't really like it because they then, as you say, don't have that shared experience because they can't see what's going on the screen.
Absolutely.
So it's one of those trends that seems to be the mums pulling it back and the kids pushing for it. So it's really interesting. I think the behaviour change will be interesting over a few years.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a big driver being able to spend that time together. And as you say, when it's on the tablet, mum's kind of, looking over her shoulder and she doesn't really get the same experience as when they're watching TV.
Sorry, I'll just nip in with a quick question. There seems to be a bit of a contradiction within a couple of the numbers in your presentation, in that you said 34% of mums were using TV to sort of sit the kids in front of while they go and do something else, and yet your percentages for the kids viewing on their own were very, very low, in like sort of the 2 to 3 to 4%. I mean, from my own experience, it's that it's much more than that, that kids viewing on their own. So I just wondered whether you thought there was something going on there.
Well, in terms of that first it's probably easier to talk about this afterwards, and we can go through the data. But the first percentage was actually any device, so it's not just TV, but it was a general kind of drivers and triggers to using something. So the trigger might be this convenience aspect. But when it comes to soulless viewing for the preschool market, sometimes it is the actual mutual viewing, which is the next chart that we talked about, but it's not just always going to be with mum. Sometimes it's with siblings, but it's also viewing when mum is within earshot and she's always got her child around, because this age group it's very young, this preschool, so it's not a case that mum wants to be upstairs, for example, when her baby's downstairs. So I think that's probably where it's the difference in shift in terms of the older children that would be viewing a lot on their own.
My question's related to that, because I was interested in the large numbers that you've got for the parent viewing with the child.
Yeah.
This is probably revealing my own shoddy parenting, but that seemed really high, and I wanted to ask a bit more about how you define that. So is that like mum sitting down and watching the programme, you know, in a kind of attentive way, or is it sitting down and, like, you know, checking your mobile while the child is watching the programme? No, I would obviously never do that. And or is it just being kind of within earshot? So what's your definition there of
well, in that one it was based on the survey, so I think the question was, I can go back to it, when was your child viewing and who were they viewing with? So it was a case of viewing with the child or viewing with a brother and sister. But of course, you may read into that they also had their device with them at the same time. So yeah, it could be a bit of both, to be honest.
Hi, thank you for that, really interesting. My question's sort of related to the lady's question behind me, but when we're looking at TV being number one still, and you said that trust was a major factor of that, so parents trust TV more. As we see younger generations starting to have children who are more used to using tablet devices from a very young age, do you think that trust factor is going to go up, and will that have an effect on tablets overtaking TV, or do you think that desire for that mutual shared activity will still kind of overrule tablets kind of becoming number one, I guess? Well,
it's difficult to know. I don't know is the honest answer. We don't know how things are going to shift. You're absolutely right in terms of point of reference. The more the generations kind of go, the more we're going to be used to interacting with devices. I think predominantly, though, there is still a fear around children being able to get outside of the content that they're supposed to be looking at. And so for that reason, mum still feels like she has to especially at this age group where she's having to navigate the content for them. I think there is still a fear that, they're going to click on something that they shouldn't do. And so that for that reason, I think it will still have a little bit of kind of fear against the TV. But you're right, I would imagine the trust factor would increase. But at the moment, I think it was around, I'm trying to remember the numbers, so it was around 50% trustworthiness for the tablet versus 70% for TV. So yeah, you could imagine that over time they may start to merge.
Thank you, Claire.
Thank you.